people like me. You need people like me so you can point your f***ing fingers and say, that's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy. That's the bad guy.
Welcome to the motherfucking relay. We're covering today's top boxing news.
A lot of people don't get on with people in boxing, but you also got to look at the bigger picture. It's not great news for boxing. It's just a sign of the future and a sign of the way that content is being distributed and delivered to fight fans, and that is via streaming. You know, we saw that a couple of years ago. We made our own move to build those partnerships and those relationships, but boxing will be worse off without Showtime, as it was worse off without HBO.
Al Haymon's contribution to the sport, making it seem less and less like a viable investment to broadcasters when you consider how many networks his PBC has been on and how many of those network relationships have ended. Anyone from NBC to Spike to Bounce to FS1 to Fox.
I think they were on ESPN briefly.
ITV in the United Kingdom. ITV for the Eubank versus the Gale fight. That endeavor only lasted one fight.
And of course, Showtime, what was their most long-standing relationship with a broadcaster. Now, even they're out of it, even they're gone.
It's tantamount to when you look at somebody's resume and they've been bouncing from place to place periodically. They can't seem to hold a job, but for so long.
You've been on all these different broadcast networks over the years, and those relationships don't seem to last. But for so long, and still,
you're gonna get the odd guy that wants to go up the bat and defend Al Haymon, to say none of this is his fault, even though he's clearly the common denominator.
That's what Dan Rafael did. He's saying that Paramount's decision to get out of the sports business, that's got nothing to do with Al.
Let's make it clear that Showtime's brand of sports, primarily Showtime's brand, revolved around boxing. Not other stuff, not tennis, not golf, boxing. Primarily boxing for 37 years. And all of this happened on Al Haymon's watch. So how is he not culpable?
Do you think that if the viewing figures were robust, if the viewing figures were good, and where the people at Paramount wanted them to be, do you think if the numbers were good, Showtime would be leaving? Is this what happens when you're on the up and up?
Is it?
When business is good?
No, it isn't. Anyone with a mild understanding of how these things works knows that this is a numbers game, and Al Haymon failed to produce the numbers. His business practices are making boxing a very risky endeavor for U.S. broadcasters. He's making the business of boxing seem less and less desirable. In this country, he is. You know, this isn't like when Matchroom migrated from Sky over to DAZN. It's not like Sky gave Matchroom the boot. Sky wanted them to stay. They wanted to keep doing business with them and stay in the Matchroom business. It was Matchroom that decided to go to a different platform, whereas the PBC, they don't have a choice.
The irony of it all.
Wasn't it Leonard Ellerby who used to refer to DAZN as Dead Zone? Dead meaning nobody watches it, nobody's there. But it's Showtime that's going out of boxing.
And it can't be because of how many people were watching them, what great numbers they were putting up. They weren't putting up great numbers, and that's the point.
What did you call it instead of the zone?
It's called the Dead Zone.
The Dead Zone.
The Dead Zone. The Dead Zone.
Showtime boxing. That's what's dead. That's the dead zone. After 37 years in the sport, through Al Haymon's efforts on Al Haymon's watch, they ran Showtime boxing into the ground. And that's the dead zone.
But do you think Al Haymon is losing any sleep over it? Do you think he's losing any sleep over Stefan Espinoza and 40 other employees in the sports department losing their jobs?
He's not. I'll bet my bottom dollar he isn't. I'll bet it's on to the next one for Al Haymon to swindle the next network executive who knows very little about the business of boxing out of some kind of a budget, some kind of a platform deal. Put simply, it's on to the next one.
While damaging the sport of boxing, the business of boxing.
It's on to the next one. They'll find a broadcaster. They'll find a broadcast partner. Now, Stefan Espinoza's out of a job. Showtime Sports is being phased out.
And if you let Dan Rafael tell it, oh, it's got nothing to do with Al.
The American media's bizarre fixation with this fixture and his penchant for failing up. He's still failing, you understand. He's still failing.
But he made Crawford versus Spence and Garcia versus Davis.
Not soon enough. Not soon enough to save Showtime Boxing. Not soon enough for Paramount.
But Wilder versus Fury was a classic.
Yeah. You know what that was? That was a box office flop. That was a pay-per-view that ended up costing people money instead of making people money because they grossly overshot it. And Top Rank's Bruce Trempler said as much some time ago. He's got no reason to lie about it. Top Rank was just as invested in that fight as the PBC was in Showtime. And in the end, all it did was cost people money. It lost money.
The second one and the third one. What little bit of money they might have made from the first, they lost on the second and the third.
So tell me again how DAZN is the quote-unquote dead zone, and it's Showtime that's the industry leader, the unequivocal #1 in boxing.
What did you call it instead of the zone?
It's called the dead zone.
The dead zone.
The dead zone. The dead zone.
So there's a lot of people championing Stephen Espinoza, losing his job and boxing not being part of that. But I know we've never really got on that well, but I think he's done a good job. And this was something that when I said it a couple of years ago, I knew those discussions were taking place for them to leave boxing. But Stephen did a great job and he wouldn't give in. And he fought for boxing. And one of the reasons it went on probably a year or two more than anticipated is because they put on great shows.
No, they didn't. They didn't put on great shows because if the shows were great, the numbers would have been great, and Paramount wouldn't have given them the axe. I don't agree with what Eddie Hearn is saying here. He says that Stefan was fighting for boxing and fighting. He was fighting to keep his job because he knew it was on the line. Underneath it all, he knew.
He gets in front of the cameras, talks to the media, acts like everything is okay. These are just rumors his competitors are making up. This is just stuff his rivals are saying about him.
About Showtime, not but a few days ago. That's what Stefan Espinoza was saying, putting on a brave face, underneath it all knowing that his job and the jobs of 40 other people at Showtime Sports were on the line. No, I think what Eddie's doing here is being gracious, choosing not to kick a man when he's down because he doesn't have to. Stefan is out of boxing. Stefan!
Showtime boxing is dead.
So he doesn't need to kick him when he's down and take jabs at him. Showtime is irrelevant to the sport of boxing, and so is Stefan Espinoza. I think this is Eddie Hearn just being gracious, and I don't feel so inclined to agree with any of this. There was plenty that Stefan could have done.
You're the president of Showtime Sports. You work for Showtime. In many ways, what you are is their quality control officer.
Your real job is ensuring the Showtime platform that their sports content is bringing them optimal views, optimal metrics, every single time. That's really what your job is, but I said it before. I think he got too close with the people at the PBC. So close, he couldn't see.
If this goes sideways, it's your ass that's gonna get thrown in the fire. The PBC, they'll be off to another platform, looking for a new broadcast partner, but you'll be out of a job.
What could he have done, you ask? Al Haymon struck a deal with the people at Fox in 2018. He funneled a sizable portion of the PBC stable over there. The guys that were buzzing at the time, the Charlo brothers, Errol Spence Jr., Deontay Wilder, Keith Thurman, so on and so forth. What could Stefan have done in that situation?
Crack the whip.
Crack the whip because you don't work for Al Haymon. You work for Showtime. Your job is to ensure that the numbers are on the up and up.
If that means you gotta match these guys tougher, that's just what that means. To draw the most eyes to the platform that you can via the matchmaking.
What PBC fighters remained on Showtime after the PBC struck that deal with Fox and funneled some of those fighters over to Fox. What fighters remained on Showtime, what Stefan should have done ideally is match those guys tough. Match them as tough as possible to get the most eyes on those fights. And don't bill them as pay-per-views. No, you don't do that. That's actually where you went wrong. Ideally, you want those fights to be part of a regular schedule of fights, a regular schedule, not behind a paywall.
No, not on pay-per-view, because only so many people are gonna buy it. You want the most people possible to see it. You want it accessible to as many eyes and as many homes as possible. So fights like Benavidez versus Plant.
You will recall that in 2019,
4 years ago,
it was Caleb Plant who was calling for the fight, and it was Samson Lukowicz, David's promoter, who wanted to hold off on doing it. He wanted to marinate it a little more so that they could do it as a pay-per-view.
Now, Caleb Plant just posted on his social medias that you said that David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant needs to take more time. Why?
Look, this business is for two reasons. Make money and more money. You need another two good fights, and then you can go to be a pay-per-view.
The obvious answer fans would say, well, we want the best fight in the best. We're tired of paying for C versus D. We want A versus A.
Well, you have two A's, no
That's
doubt.
what I mean, two A's and David Benavidez and Caleb
To
Plant.
see two A fighters, you need to pay. You cannot be for free.
That's where you fucked up at. Everybody can't end up on pay-per-view. In order to make an omelet, you have to crack a couple of eggs.
they can't all be pay-per-view stars. You guys waited 4 years to do that fight, just so that 4 years later, it would sell next to nothing at the box office.
For that, you could have done it then. And if you would have done it then as a regular Showtime fight, it likely would have drew over 1 million eyes to the platform as a regular Showtime fight, not a pay-per-view. Two unbeaten champions in their prime in a unification match on regular Showtime.
Not behind a paywall.
And if you do this enough, for your regular schedule of fights, your numbers are gonna stay on the up and up. You think about how many pay-per-views they did for Gervonta Davis. This kid's been on pay-per-view 5 times, but he only ever did 1 million buys once, and that was with Ryan. The other 5 pay-per-views, you may as well have built those as regular Showtime fights, because if you did, they would have drew more eyes to the platform than putting them behind a paywall.
I mean, look at what the numbers were. 200,000 buys here, just north of 200,000 buys there, 250. These are not pay-per-view worthy fights.
And by putting them on pay-per-view, you're limiting how many eyes you can get on them. If they were regular Showtime fights, you could have drawn in excess of 500,000 to 1 million viewers with some of these fights. And those viewing figures may have satisfied the higher-ups, the people above Stefan Espinoza, the people at Paramount, that this PBC stuff were consistently getting good numbers from these guys.
which would have made them more of a priority, would have made that content more of a priority to the higher-ups.
If you want to keep your job, it's them you have to satisfy, not some butterball with an inflated ego and delusions of grandeur, his manager. No, if you want to keep your job, it's your higher-ups you have to satisfy because you're their quality control officer. In many ways, the reason that Showtime ended up leaving boxing is because it was a quality control problem. From the beginning, the matchmaking wasn't tough enough.
All you've got are pointless filler fights on the regular schedule, and every halfway decent fight costs $80.
Fights that would have better serviced the platform as regular Showtime fights because they would have drawn more eyes to it.
Stefan didn't want to crack the whip.
Even after Haymon took a sizable portion of the stable, the popular guys, to a different network, Stefan didn't want to crack the whip. He didn't want to do what he needed to do. And now he's out of a job.
In one sentence, the matchmaking needed to be better, and it needed to be better for a long time.
That instead of prioritizing what's best for the platform, you prioritize the fighters and their outrageous demands. And as a result of not prioritizing the platform deprioritized you and all your content.
Now those fighters are off to some other platform, and you're on the unemployment line.
Can't say as I didn't tell you so. Oscar De La Hoya, like Eddie Hearn, reacted to the news saying, "I salute Showtime for their near 40-year commitment to the sport that I love. I am hopeful that we promoters can use this unfortunate situation to put our differences aside and start working together more often to make more of the bigger fights and grow our sport." And Oscar, I don't agree with everything Oscar says. I don't.
There are quite a few things that he said in the past in reference to certain fights and certain fighters, so on and so forth, that I haven't agreed with. But when it comes to this, He's right.
Consolidation is the ticket. Consolidation is the key. These promotional outfits need to band together because what they're doing now is squabbling over scraps. Scraps in the American boxing scene. You will notice that some of the biggest fights the sport has seen in postmodern...
Think about Maypac for a second. That's the highest grossing fight of all times, just commercially. Whether you liked it or not, the fight's aesthetic, whether or not you were entertained, that's a different conversation.
But commercially, it's the biggest pay-per-view that's ever been put on. The biggest numbers on pay-per-view, the biggest numbers at the gate. And it just so happens that that was two separate promotional outfits. Two different fighters that are with two different outfits that came together to make a big fight.
Garcia versus Davis.
Same underlying principle. Two different fighters that are with two different outfits coming together to make a big fight, a mega fight. Individually, they don't really do all that much, but when you put them together, now you're cooking with rice. Now you have a show. And boxing needs more of this, and what this is consolidation.
In a manner of speaking, a house divided cannot stand, but together.
There are actually some that are calling for the PBC to go to Amazon, and they might. As if that's going to solve the problem. I saw one guy say that if the PBC goes to Amazon, they'll crush the zone.
You know, because they got over 100 million subscribers.
Another Haymonite, another critical thinker, another genius who picked Errol Spence to beat Terrence Crawford. I guess he didn't get the memo that Fox is a bigger network, by and large, than Showtime, than DAZN, bigger even than ESPN. And the PBC didn't crush anybody when they were on Fox. So they're not going to crush anybody if they jump into bed with Amazon.
It'll just be more of the same, actually. It'll just be history repeating itself and the PBC continuing to isolate itself, try to, from everybody else.
Which is what saw NBC leave the sport of boxing, Bounce, Spike, which is what saw Fox leave the sport of boxing. More recently, Showtime. If they jump into bed with Amazon, it doesn't fix the underlying problem. It's just a temporary solution to their immediate problem, but not the long-term one. If you want to stimulate the market for boxing here in America, you have to come together and you need more cross-promotional fights. The best way to do that is to consolidate these promoters on select platforms, namely ESPN or DAZN. Anywhere that they're already doing boxing, anywhere that they're already doing sports.
That's not what these guys want, though. These critical thinkers.
It seems to me that what they would prefer is for the sport to stay divided, which is why the sport isn't as big as it used to be. Not in this country. It's bigger around the world. There are several flourishing markets, but in America, boxing is faded into the background, and the division of the sport is why, and that seems to be what these guys want.
That doesn't benefit the sport.
You can lead a horse to water, but you can't make him drink. And you can show these guys the facts, but you can't make them listen. You can't fix stupid.
I said for years, this is what was going to end up happening. Just like I said for years, Crawford's going to kick Spence's ass up and down that ring. And it happened. It all happened. But you can't make these guys listen.
You can't fix stupid. All we can do is wait and see. Wait and see where the PBC goes, and then we'll take it from there.